Darkseid War is one of the greatest stories ever told in DC Comics, and I imagine there's probably a lot of people who are interested in getting into DC, specifically Darkseid, because of what's happening with the Absolute Universe, DC KO, and they just kind of want to learn more about his character. So I figured now would be a great time to remaster the old Darkseid War videos that we did from like 5 or 6 years ago. So one of the things to understand about Darkseid War is this is actually the final story arc that DC did during the New 52. And this is actually a bridging story arc, which is to say this transitions the DC Universe from the New 52 into DC Universe Rebirth number 1, which is what launched DC Rebirth. But this also comes off the heels of several other stories within DC Comics, and we'll actually cover those as we cross those various bridges. But what this initially does is it opens up with Mr. Miracle. Now, he doesn't really seem like an overly significant character, but in fact, he will be stupendously important over the course of the story. So without covering what's happening with him at the outset, there's no conceivable way you could really understand everything else that's going on. So what he says here is he says, "I'm not worth much. That's what I've been told all my life. When I was 7, my father was told the only way to end the war between New Genesis and Apocalypse was if he exchanged sons with Darkseid. I begged not to be chosen, but I was. And while my father welcomed Darkseid's savage son to the family dinner table and taught him how to use a fork, I was taken to Apocalypse, thrown into the slave pits, and forgotten. But eventually, being forgotten became an advantage. The first 3 years on Apocalypse, it was only torture and tears. Then one night, when I finally stopped crying, when the torches were put out, I tried to open my cell door. It took me over a year to pick the lock. I got 10 feet before I panicked and shut myself back in. It took me 2 more months to pick the lock again. That time, I explored the entire cell block. I ventured as far as the doors leading to the solar pit. I opened my cell every night after. I traveled across the lands of Apocalypse, returning before the slave masters knew I'd gone, until one day, I didn't go back. I faced and fought the worst of this world. I allied myself with revolutionaries. I found hope. I saved lives. I fell in love. I escaped. When I fled to Earth, my given name was simply Scott. I had no surname, so I made one. I became scot-free, though most everyone knows me now as Mr. Miracle. So, here's the kind of thing to understand here. Number 1, he's infiltrating Apocalypse, and doing so scares the heck out of him. But he's doing this for a particular reason, and we'll talk more about that here in a second. But one of the things to understand is the nature of Darkseid and Apocalypse in relation to Highfather in New Genesis. Historically speaking, when Jack Kirby originally created Darkseid, and then when Jack Kirby left and DC rolled Darkseid and the Fourth World over into the main DC universe, whether it was stories like JLA Rock of Ages from Grant Morrison's run, or even Grant Morrison's Final Crisis, oftentimes DC tries to present this scenario where Darkseid represents the concept of absolute evil and Highfather represents the concept of absolute good. What made things like Rock of Ages and Final Crisis so interesting was that it was Grant Morrison depicting this idea that when it comes to Darkseid, yes, he represents absolute evil and Highfather represents absolute good, but neither of these exist in absolutes. Morality is relative, so there is such a thing as doing a bad thing for a good reason, that the ends justify the means, which is why sometimes Highfather might be depicted as a villain. Now, truth to tell, Final Crisis was just the new gods dying, right? Darkseid dying and creating what's essentially a multiversal gravity sink, right? Literally sucking everything into existence. We can remaster that story too if you want to, but the reason why I bring all that up is because there was a guy named Metron, who we'll talk about here in a little bit, and Metron was the one who brokered the deal between Darkseid and Highfather, the idea of them exchanging sons, the belief being that if their sons existed on their villains' worlds, then that would basically nullify any reason for them to go to war with each other. Because if the new gods go to war and the new gods destroy each other, that would lead to the end of reality. That's why I bring up Final Crisis, because that's what happened in Final Crisis. And so with Scott-Free being here, right, one of the things that he says is years ago, Darkseid was knocked off the top of the food chain by the Justice League. It was the first and only time Darkseid has ever been prevented from transforming a world into one of his parademon factories. Since then, he's been searching for a way to amp up his power and return to Earth. Rumors are he found one, and now more rumors are saying he's amassing his armies, not only from Apokolips, but from the thousands of other planets that he's bioformed. Darkseid's up to something big, and I need to find out exactly what, but I won't be able to stop him alone. I'm going to need help. I'm going to need the people who went to war with him before and won. I am going to need the Justice League. Now, here's the thing to know. Because Darkseid War was the end result of the New 52, a lot of what we saw in the early days, right, the beginning of Earth 2, the first story arc of the New 52 when the Justice League went against Darkseid, because they literally fight him in the first 6 issues. It's kind of nuts. A lot of that just kind of looked like Darkseid doing things, right? Just Darkseid looking to invade the main DC universe. He was defeated by the Justice League, and so now it's the itch he can't scratch, and the only thing he really wanted to do was conquer the main DC universe. That was the expectation over the years. Earth 2 just gave us an example of what it would look like if he won, right? If like Steppenwolf, one of his generals, went to an alternate reality and succeeded in killing the Justice League and conquering it in the name of Darkseid, albeit Steppenwolf was run off and then it was like the new age of heroes and so on and so forth. What Darkseid War does is it establishes that everything that Darkseid had done over the course of the New 52 was all for one singular purpose. And again, we'll find out what that purpose is. But following this, we end up jumping to Kanto, one of Darkseid's assassins. And on the surface, it just kind of seems fairly basic, right? Like a woman's coming home and she's looking for her husband and kind of talking to him about some of the craziness that's going on, only to find out that her husband isn't there. And Kanto's waiting on her. Now, Kanto is prodigious. When this guy comes for you, it's curtains. It's game over. Drapes. There is no getting away from this guy. He's that good. And so all he does is really ask this woman, are you Marina Black? And she just keeps asking questions, right? Like, where's my husband? She calls out for Thomas, and Kanto just throws a dagger at her and kills her. And at that point, Lashina shows up. Now, Lashina is one of the Furies of Darkseid. And for those of you guys who are new to DC Comics, one of the biggest misconceptions is that on the planet Apokolips, it's just Darkseid and his generals. And like, that's it. No. There's a lot more than just parademons running around the place, right? You actually have sentient beings, right? Humans and a combination of other races that live there, and they're largely just kind of living down in the slave pens, whatever the case happens to be. In addition to Steppenwolf, Kanto, people like that, you have the Furies. The Furies are technically trained by Granny Goodness. She's not nearly as good as her name suggests. Her cookies probably taste like ass, but Granny Goodness is hardcore, and the Furies are no laughing matter. If Darkseid sends the Furies after you, there is a like 90% chance you are going to die. Very rarely do you see someone succeed against the Furies of Darkseid, but the two of them are on the hunt for a person, specifically Marina Black. Now, we'll also talk about her here in a minute. So all these pieces are going to start coming together and kind of coalescing into forming this bigger picture with so many questions and mysteries being left here. But jumping back to the Justice League, one of the things that ends up happening is that after Kanto and Lashina leave, this leads to the Justice League investigating the crime scene. Now, it is important to understand here, the Justice League as they were depicted in the New 52 was somewhat divisive, right? And when I say the Justice League, I don't really mean the nature of the team, just the heroes involved. Batman, of course, was phenomenal, right? The New 52 run, Scott Snyder, Greg Capullo. Shazam was a backup feature in the Justice League comics. Cyborg was okay. The reason why I say that it was a bit controversial is because when the New 52 kicked off, the superheroes that we were shown were younger. They were a little more brash, more reckless, especially Superman, right? He was kind of learning what it meant to be a superhero. Zack Snyder's entire DC universe was actually based on the New 52 depiction of Superman, if my memory serves me correctly. I could be wrong, and I'm sure the Snyder stands will correct me if I am, but the bigger point is that it's not your grandfather's Justice League, right? The team of heroes who have it all figured out and always fight the good fight, that kind of thing, right? They're all fairly new, and they're kind of coming together for the very first time in the original Justice League arc. And while they have worked together, they're not nearly as cohesive as you would expect for a Justice League team. But a lot of what happens here comes by way of the narrative of Wonder Woman, where she says, we all want to protect the world that we share, and we all want a place in it. That's why we came together. Of course, referring to the Justice League. Normally, the League does not work crime scenes, but this one is different. Victor's body was rebuilt with unknown and alien technology. Some of it was from Apocalypse. If a boom tube opens anywhere on Earth, he gets a migraine. Boom tubes are traditionally the method of teleportation used by new gods, but specifically by Darkseid. And so she says it's all delayed and it takes a toll on his system, but Victor fights through the pain so he can track it to a house where 2 people are dead. Steve clears the area so we can get to work. He's tried to look out for me since the day I left the island. I still wonder about us, though I'm not sure he does anymore. That love is the most powerful force in the world, but it can be hard, or at least complicated. That, of course, is referencing the idea of Steve Trevor and Wonder Woman being a couple at the beginning of the New 52 and over the course of the New 52 until they ended up splitting. But focusing on the actual scene itself, Wonder Woman says they found the husband's body in the upstairs hallway. Hal and Jessica can isolate a single hair follicle or skin cell with their rings, though Jessica's can be unreliable. Now, this brings us into a bit of a conversation about Jessica Cruz. Jessica Cruz was one of the coolest characters ever introduced in DC Comics, and DC actually didn't really squander her. For a while, she was kind of free-floating, but then you went into, I think it was Sam Humphries' Green Lantern's Rebirth, which focused on her and Simon Baz. That was a phenomenal story. The idea behind Jessica Cruz is she debuted in a story called Forever Evil. We'll actually talk a little bit more about that here in a second, because it'll become very important in our conversations about Lex Luthor in this story. What Wonder Woman also says is that processing evidence, Bruce and Barry put their egos aside. Not that Barry really has one. And of course, because Barry Allen's the Flash and he's so fast, he can grab some DNA that comes off of the wine glass that Kanto was drinking, race back, analyze it, bring it back, and then basically tell Batman, we don't have any answers. We don't know who this person is. The only thing we know is that they are not human. Now, of course, they know enough to know that the new gods are somehow involved, right? Just because of boom tube technology and the fact that Victor Stone derives some of his technology from Apocalypse. But one of the things to remember is that the Justice League is not overly knowledgeable about Darkseid and Apocalypse at this point in time. Certainly not the way they were before the New 52, if we're talking about like Grant Morrison's JLA from 1998. But one of the cool things they talk about here is Shazam. That while Shazam, again, his solo series was a backup feature in the Justice League, he was one of the standout stars of the New 52. I don't know if people really recognize that, and it sucks if they don't, but he was great, because you kind of got a lot of emphasis and a lot of focus on the fact that at the end of the day, while Jerry Ostrander's Shazam storyline depicted this idea that essentially Billy Batson turns into his dad when he turns into Shazam, or what he imagined his dad to look like, that he's still a kid at the end of it all. And so that's why Wonder Woman says, Cyborg and Shazam are the youngest of us. The youth doesn't often show in Victor, but it does in Shazam. Because Shazam is kind of overtaken by this and turns away. And Victor's just kind of like, I mean, what is it? And he just says, I've never seen a dead body before. It's the first time he's come across something like that, so it's so easy to forget that he is a child. But kind of jumping back in to this bit of a discussion about Forever Evil, as we transition to Superman and Lex Luthor, what Superman says here is, I heard they transferred Neutron from Argus to LexCorp. Why? And Lex Luthor says LexCorp is far more capable of treating Neutron than some shadowy government agency looking over the shoulders of metahumans. Neutron is dying, and despite him trying to kill me, I do not want that to happen. He may be the only one of us who can tell us who's put a price on my head. And Superman says, right, I understand you want answers. Make sure you only get them by asking. Now, here's the thing they're talking about with the idea of Neutron and why Lex Luthor and Superman are basically hanging out with each other and how it all ties into Forever Evil. So the idea behind Neutron is that he was the catalyst for the Amazo storyline. Basically, Amazo was a virus created by Lex Luthor, I believe. The idea was that it could essentially shut down metahuman powers. Ultimately, it was rejected. Neutron was contracted to take out Lex Luthor. During that process, he unintentionally let loose the Amazo virus, which started granting powers to people all over the place. Pretty much everybody was taken care of, right? They were cured, for lack of a better word. Neutron is still struggling, right, with everything that's gone on. But as to Superman and Lex being friends, Forever Evil was one of the greatest stories that DC had ever written. I know it can be kind of divisive. I thought it was phenomenal. It was technically a precursor to Trinity War, and in fact, Forever Evil directly segues into this, and this story deals with Forever Evil in some capacity. The long and short of the Forever Evil story was that the crime syndicate from Earth 3, so an evil version of the Justice League, had invaded the main DC universe, and where the superheroes were all basically taken out by like Ultraman and Superwoman and so on and so forth. This led to Lex Luthor rallying the villains together, and the villains became the good guys of the story. It was phenomenal. But that's also why Jessica Cruz was important, because Jessica Cruz ended up getting the powers of Hal Jordan from the crime syndicate. Unlike the main DC universe, where Hal Jordan derives his abilities from willpower and he's brave and almost never succumbs to fear, that in the crime syndicate universe, Hal Jordan was a coward. And so while his code name was Power Ring, the ring that he had was possessed by a being known as Volthoom. Now that was explored further in Green Lantern's Rebirth, that Volthoom was actually a guy who would put a portion of his soul or his essence into a ring in Earth 3 and then ultimately abandon that reality, and then basically showed the Guardians of the Universe how to create Green Lanterns. There's a whole history behind there that'll kind of take us down a rabbit hole that we don't have to go into here. What matters is during Forever Evil, the power ring of Hal Jordan left him, and then it ended up bonding itself to Jessica Cruz, this girl who was just riddled with anxiety. And so she is essentially a Green Lantern that always has Volthoom whispering in her ear, trying to get her to do terrible things. And that was her kind of story arc over the course of the New 52, specifically during Geoff Johns' run, following Forever Evil, Godhead, all that kind of stuff. But kind of transitioning back to the conversation between Superman and Lex, right, with all that out of the way. Superman does talk about the idea of having super hearing and the idea that Neutron did make a credible threat on Lex's life. Lex seemed to kind of be toying with the idea of maybe helping Neutron finish all his living, that his sister Lena Luthor talked Lex out of it. We'll kind of continue a bit into her story here in a second, but the reality is that Lex Luthor's basically a good guy, that in the aftermath of Forever Evil, Lex Luthor tried to join the Justice League, and initially they rejected him, but the Justice League really kind of came to the realization that Lex Luthor is going to continue to try to be a good guy in some capacity, and so at the very least, they can keep a close eye on him if he's on the Justice League. It's not that dissimilar from like when Deadpool tried to join the X-Men, right? And Wolverine told Cyclops, you might want to actually let him join the team because at least we can keep an eye on what he's doing. It was that same thing with Lex. And so it is a tenuous relationship. Superman does not trust Lex Luthor at this point in time, but still, it's kind of interesting to see them relate in that way. And so at that point, we jump back to Scott Free. And this is where things get cool, because what ends up happening here is that Scott Free, in his investigations on Apocalypse, plugs his mother box right into the computer system of Apocalypse to download information and figure out what it is that Darkseid's hunting for. In the midst of that, Darkseid appears, and Darkseid has never looked more menacing in DC Comics. He looks absolutely phenomenal here. Darkseid in the Darkseid War storyline is wildly powerful, and he just tells Scott, right? He's like, those colors, and Scott just looks at him, right? And he just asks, what? And Darkseid says, why do you wear those colors? And where Scott initially tries to put on some bravado, right? Like, do you think I'm gonna go down without a fight? That kind of a thing. Darkseid doesn't really care. He's like, do you wear them because they come from New Genesis? That world that pretends to embody fairness and tolerance, the world that you despise for sending you here, the world that you refuse to return to? Is it because there are colors like those there? Is that why you wear them? And Scott just says, I choose to wear them, and like launches a kind of small attack against Darkseid. Doesn't do anything to him, but Darkseid just asks, you choose, right? You think because you survived my camps, because you escaped your cells, because you run free, that you are free? That is not your name. You are not free, slave, and you never have been. And fires off his Omega Sanctuary, his Omega beams at Mr. Miracle. And he says, there was another man long ago on Apocalypse who resisted my will for a time. When his will became mine, he hunted down his family. He crushed their skulls with a rock. You have many that you care about, friends and a lover. I know about Barda, slave. You stole her from my furies. And Scott just says, and I know what you're after, Darkseid. And Darkseid just asks, right, do you think that matters? With his boot on Scott's entire upper chest. That's how big Darkseid is. He's enormous. And Scott does the only thing he can do. He touches his mother box and teleports out of there as fast as he possibly can. And so jumping back to the Justice League, this is when it all starts to go off the rails. Because what ends up happening here is the Justice League doing this investigation realizes the woman that's been killed here is named Marina Black. Not only that, the other Marina Blacks have been killed within a relatively short period of time. A second one was killed 30 minutes ago in Virginia, a third one in Miami 10 minutes ago. Someone is hunting for people named Marina Black. So the most logical conclusion for Cyborg to draw is that they should find everyone named Marina Black in the United States and then go out and save as many of them as they can, right? Bring them to a safe location before someone can kill them. The problem is that in the middle of all of this, Barry Allen starts freaking out, right? He starts losing his mind, gasping and whatnot. And there's just this statement: I have his frequency locked. You are a doorway traveler for me. And like his mouth opens up and this force of energy comes flying out, and it's just this girl with gray skin and red eyes. And she just says, I am going to hurt you all so very, very much. And the first person she looks at is Batman. And she says, you are the human among others. Even still, you could cause me serious trouble, so you hurt first. And she crushes Batman, like literally takes him out in like 2 hits. She's like, here and here. Batman's down for the count. And then she just tells him, sleep, Prince of Darkness. And so then Cyborg goes to attack, and she just says, and you? I sense a mother box in there somewhere. Give it to me. And just immediately goes after him and takes out Cyborg. And she says, I've studied you. All of you, Victor Stone, Cyborg, you're more dangerous to me than Batman. Your technology is evolving. Your parts will be very valuable to me. And so then Shazam gets his hands on her and just says, let go of my friend, and just like sends her flying into a truck. And initially where he goes to respond, right, to kind of take care of Cyborg, he gets stabbed in the back by this girl, and she just says, poor child, I hate to end them so young. And so then Wonder Woman immediately responds and just says, who are you? Tell me. And in that moment, Wonder Woman chimes in to Superman, right? And he's like, what's going on? And she's like, the League's under attack. And he asks by who? And she says, I'm not sure. My lasso is not working on this woman. And that's what the woman says. Are you talking to the Kryptonian? Is he wondering who I am? Are you? Dear sister, it is no secret. I am of Amazon blood. And she says, and I carry on the mission that we were created for. And just like blows Wonder Woman's bracelets apart. And then she says, you're stronger without them, aren't you? My mother told me all about you, princess, like your queen and her sheep. And she says, what a failure you are to the great gods, like all humans. And so after Wonder Woman's defeat, Jessica Cruz shows up, right? And Jessica Cruz gets manhandled. And in fact, this woman says, he's not the one I require though, not yet anyway, right? Referring to Hal Jordan after he's just literally had his clock cleaned. And she says, it's you, Jessica Cruz. You hold a tether to another universe. Your ring does, right? Earth 3, the crime syndicate. And she says, and the evil power within your ring will serve me well because I need shadows, and immediately harnesses the power of Jessica Cruz's ring. And this girl just says, the shadows of those who would stand against him, an army will rise. And that's where you have Ultraman, who's literally been held prisoner ever since Forever Evil, just sitting in a cell, terrified for his life. Because the reality here is that, again, where the crime syndicate invaded the main DC universe in Forever Evil, we didn't initially know why, but we found out why during Darkseid War, because he says, the monster is coming for us. And this girl says, the darkness within will destroy the light. The darkness calls. Can you hear me? I am waiting for you. And this literally opens a portal. And when that portal opens, the Destroyer is here. The Anti-Monitor arrives on the scene. Not only that, you switch back over to Superman and to Lex Luthor. And Lena Luthor is kind of watching all this unfold. Now, Lena Luthor was brought in by Lex Luthor. He essentially stole all of her ideas for like tech stuff, but she'd been working with Luthor ever since. And where the communication between Wonder Woman and Superman obviously involves the Justice League, and so Lex Luthor starts suiting up in order to respond to the crisis, Superman tells him, no matter how your PR dresses you up, you are still a common criminal. Between the Omezo virus and this, we don't need your help. The League is done with you. And that's where Lex fires on Superman and says, that is not for you to decide. You are not the leader of the Justice League, and I will not be talked to like that in front of my sister by anyone. And so Lena fires off a shot at Lex Luthor and says, I suppose it's true, right? If you want something done, you have to do it yourself. And she says, don't look so surprised, Superman. Everybody hates him. And so while Superman's just standing there holding Luthor, and Luthor's just like bleeding out all over the place, Superman just asks why, right? And then you switch to Superwoman from Earth 3, who's like, now this one, he's here. oh sweet child. And Lena Luthor just says, send my brother and Superman to their end, because she's holding a mother box, and the mother box just says, yes, Lena Luthor. And Lena says, for Darkseid, and teleports Superman and Lex Luthor to Apokolips. Not only that, when Scott Free had escaped Darkseid, he had teleported to Earth, right, getting to the only place that he knew where he could find some measure of allies, and was immediately ambushed by Lashina and Kanto. And so when that happened, this fight kind of stretching on for a chunky period of time, he's basically being overwhelmed. And so he does the only thing he can do, right? He says, mother box, steal their coordinates, jump and cover. Now, right, the mother box teleports him away, and he just arrives in front of this giant griffin, only to be directly confronted with the Marina Black that Kanto and Lashina have been hunting for. And she tells him what her name is, and she says, I have spent decades planning a war to kill Darkseid. Won't you join me? Now, here's the important thing, and here's where all this is starting to come into play. And this is why I say Scott Free is stupendously important, because he's the linchpin to understanding it all. That in this conversation out in Athens that he has with Marina Black, when she says, I am Marina Black, she says, you are the youngest son of Highfather. You are the escapist. And when there's a little banter back and forth, she starts revealing what's going on, right? He tells her, you don't understand. Kanto and Lashina are two of the deadliest beings alive, and they are hunting you. I have never seen Darkseid single people out other than myself. And he asks, who are you? And she just says, humanity's savior. And she says, I was once the Amazons' chosen assassin until they abandoned the great mission the old gods gave us. We were given life by the old gods to save the world from war. And so I have. This place is my mission temple, hidden within the glass and steel of the modern world. I fought for decades to protect it, from the scourge of the Red Panzer and his fascists to the religious fanatics of the Minister Blizzard, all in preparation for this. We both want the same thing, Scott. While Queen Hippolyta chose to hide on the island of Themyscira, I refused. I knew that Darkseid was out there, and one day he would enslave us all. So I created a weapon. I had his daughter, Grail. And Scott's initially taken back, like, you chose to bang Darkseid? And she says, I sent Grail to traverse reality in search of a being with the power to kill Darkseid. She found him, and she has brought the Anti-Monitor to Earth. And so Scott just asks, right, you're starting a war with Darkseid on Earth. And he's like, billions of people are going to be killed. And Marina just says, war is not free. Right? She says, there's always a cost. I have learned that, if nothing else. I have lost people that I have loved too. Haven't you? But after everything that you've seen since you were first thrown into Darkseid slave camps, certainly you understand that. Darkseid must die at any price. And that's where Scott says, I'm not even sure that he can die. We need to keep Darkseid as far away from here as possible. He does not share her level of fanaticism, and that is enough for her to know he needs to die. And Scott Free is not going to be able to take her out. Scott Free's capable, right? I mean, the guy's some measure of a fighter, but what makes Mr. Miracle so significant is he can break out of anything, but he's hardly the most prodigious fighter to ever live. And so again, he flees. Using his mother box, he ends up getting teleported to the Justice League. The problem is that when he gets there, all hell's breaking loose, because the Justice League are confronted with the Anti-Monitor, and that's no small thing, right? To say nothing of the fact that Grail's still trying to fight everybody, right? And trying to destroy everyone. So the Justice League do what they can against the Anti-Monitor, but I mean, you're talking about a guy with a level of power that can wipe out an entire universe. These guys might as well be firing guns into the moon as it's crashing into Earth. It's not going to do them any good whatsoever. And it's one of these things where Wonder Woman just looks at Anti-Monitor and just asks, what are you? And the Anti-Monitor just says, I am desperate. Because one of the things to keep in mind is that while the Green Lantern mythos is a little finicky, right, Sinestro Corps War, Blackest Night, so on and so forth, by and large, by the time you get to Darkseid War, you can just kind of operate on the idea that the Justice League has never faced off against the Anti-Monitor, and they don't know what he is. But for the most part, they're saved, because in the midst of all of this, Metron teleports in. Now, of course, Metron knows exactly what Grail's doing, and he knows exactly what the Anti-Monitor is up to. Both of them have their own vendettas in destroying Darkseid. And so Metron pulls the smart move here. He teleports the Justice League out of there as fast as humanly possible. So by the time Scott Free arrives to where the Justice League is at, he actually ends up crashing in with the Justice League when they've been teleported to the Rock of Eternity, the base of operations for Shazam. What's funny about this is that Metron brought them here not to like show them, here's what you can do in order to save your world. No. He brings them here because he's just like, I brought you here to keep you alive. There is no saving your world. I mean, he literally attacked Earth 3 and destroyed pretty much that entire reality. There's nothing you can do to stop that guy. He is way beyond you, right? His furrow is beyond any of you, right? Quoting Gandalf, that's what we're talking about here, right? He's like, there is no saving your world. And that's why he says, go to your loved ones and leave Earth if you wish to survive. And so Wonder Woman just says, if you know us, Metron, you know that we would never do that. And so she just says, tell us who that monster was. And she throws her lasso around Metron, compelling him to speak the truth. And where he asks, like, what are you doing? She says, getting some answers. Who is the Anti-Monitor? And Hal just tells her, right, like, do not bother with the lasso, Diana. Metron does not have the answers. The chair does. The guy's only a living Wikipedia because of the information within the chair. And so she asks, right, how do I get the information I need to stop the Anti-Monitor? And Metron just says, right, you can't. He tries to resist it, right? He tries to resist the influence. And Wonder Woman just says, the truth. How do I get the answers to my questions? And ultimately, Metron is just forced, right? He's compelled into telling her, you have to take the chair from me. And she's like, fair enough, and yanks him off the chair. And so at that point, it's one of these things where like Metron and the Mobius chair are almost irrevocably intertwined. Seemingly, no one can just sit on the chair. It's not ChatGPT. You don't just download it and just start asking it questions and it fires answers back at you, and you just cross your fingers hoping that it's not lying. No. Right? The Mobius chair is immensely powerful because what you're talking about is all information that has ever been recorded across the multiverse within this chair. It would overwhelm and just shut down the brain of anyone who sits on it. Fortunately, not just anybody sits on the chair. Because when Hal says, right, the chair's getting ready to boom tube out of here, someone has to take it, Batman says, I've got it. And Batman sits on the Mobius chair. You've seen this shot a million times. You've seen this shot a million times across the internet, even if you didn't know where it was from. Because when that happens, the chair starts to ping. Essentially, the signal that it's giving answers to questions that exist out there. And that's when Batman says, I can hear them. The answers to everything. Are they real, right? Is this real? And so we ask the question, who killed my parents? It's a test to see how accurate the chair is. And the chair pings, give him an answer. And he says, yes, Joe Chill. That's correct. What's the Joker's true name? The chair pings, and he's like, that's not possible, right? The answer he gets blows his mind. Why? Because Batman is basically told there are 3 Jokers. Not only that, right? Hal Jordan says Batman can barely interface with a power ring. This kind of tech hacked into his head. And so Wonder Woman asks, Batman, are you okay? And he says, of course, Diana, I'm a god now. With that being said, guys, we're going to bring this to an end because we haven't even gotten to the fight between Darkseid and Anti-Monitor yet. I told you, like, the story's crazy. So many things happen in Darkseid War. Hopefully you guys enjoyed this video. If you did, drop a like. Thank you all for watching, and I will catch you all later. Peace.